Well, hello and welcome to, I think, my new look cellar. Not in here. In here, it's still the same, but it'll be stone soon, and I think that'll go on my great-granddaughter's wall. She has a good imagination. I think she can have fun with that. Good news, I have a sponsor. This is only part of the deal. They are not the sponsor. As you will see at the end, in the outro, new outro, my new sponsor is the Independent Publishers Union. They are comprised of Northwood Adventures, that's Jeff Delaney and his Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, wonderful game. Skeeter Green Productions, Skeeter Green, Crypto the Science Wizard, is probably his coolest one to date, but he keeps churning out good stuff. And you'll have all the websites and stuff at the back. Planet X Games, that's Levi Combs. And Silver Boule Games, Ian McCarty and Rocky Gardner. And Mud Puppy Games by Jim Wampler. Or run by, comprised of, whatever, those are the people. And we have reached an agreement. They're going to provide me with 12 cans every 6 weeks. That's 2 a shot, and I usually go through at least one during this. Because I never start these before midnight. I just enjoy it more that way. All right, let's get into the good stuff. Okay, this is an individual that wanted suggestions or help or whatever. After rescuing the kobolds from the dungeon, the players settled them in the woods and reached a large city nearby. Okay, they were rescuing kobolds. Okay, that must have been the original mission. Hanging around town to rest up, they found out about a dungeon nearby, and before leaving, they decided to ask around for anyone willing to help in the next adventure. I rolled some characters, rolled for their levels with 2d6, take the lowest, and they haggled some and hired a level 2 magic user and a level 4 fighting man. The 2 PCs are level 4, and it feels like hiring on another character of the same level is an unearned advancement in a way. It's the way to handle this. We'll keep on going. Do you think hirelings should always be level 1? No. This also has me thinking about hirelings were used back in the day, back at Carbondale. Did the players use hirelings? Yes, a lot in the beginning. Or was it 1 character per player? No, that's not how it worked. I'll explain. When thinking of how the game should be played, did you or Gary have any expectations on hirelings? In your own games, how do you handle hirelings? Okay, this is something that Gary and I did talk about over the phone 3 times when I was running the Carbondale adventure, and the ruins of Qualishar, it was known as. We, at the time, we ran hirelings differently. Should they always be level 1? No, what's the point? Now, if you just want a flunky, a pack bearer, a horse handler, something like that, an NPC 1, why? You got to pay him. You got to provide for him. You got to look out for him. In the early days, and I can't speak for how it evolved more recently, in the early days when we were faced, or the players in this case in my campaign, were faced with a daunting task, I generally allowed them to advertise around, put out the word, whisper, and for specialists is what we referred to them as, though they were just higher level player NPCs. So when my guys were 2 and 3 and 4th level fighters, I would let them hire a 5th or a 6th level and one to the group. This is not something that I allowed a lot of abuse of. If again, when they were early and low, low levels and that, and they were faced with some obvious possibilities for magic, then I would allow them to hire a hedge wizard, perhaps of 4th or even perhaps 5th level. Again, depending upon how low their levels were. When they got more powerful, they didn't need this. And also, it helped me get them through, understand how to / balance threat versus reward versus the party setting out for it and not overbalancing them. If I had already prepared something that they already knew about was coming, etc., and they needed beefing up, I let them do it. Now, it's not an unearned advance when they're there to do your heavy fighting, your heavy lifting, or they're there to wield the, bring the thunder with the lightning bolt or whatever, or less often they would hire a cleric, a vagabond monk, whatever, that was 3rd maybe or 4th level, and we played it differently back then. I played it differently with spells, but anyway, the way to compensate and make it painful for the party to do this so that they don't abuse it is to decide how many shares of treasure there's going to be. 10 shares, 20 shares, whatever. The number is not really as important as to how many pieces there are to give up to the party. And here's where magic and magical weapons get in the way. But when you're figuring loot, gold and gems and silver and what have you, and you have it's kind of like sort of the way some of the pirates in the height of piracy in the Caribbean would do it. So many shares, and what's the way the British did it with prize money. So many shares, and the biggest share, the lion's share, if you will, went to the captain. In this case, if you decide that, okay, there'll be 20 shares, and that you'll invest in, we'll say there's 5 of you, and so you'll invest 8 of those shares to get the help you need. So while you 5 are dividing up 12, perhaps, maybe not, could be the allocation is not exactly even down the line for various reasons. The NPCs are pulling down 4 each. They're pulling down, those 2 are pulling down 40% of the takeage, as they say in the Knights. That's a big drain on the party. And you can also have the have these hired guns demand and get, or not, a guarantee, a minimum. And so if the thing's a bust, you're still on the hook to these guys. Lots of ways you can handle that. We used it as specialists. Before there were thieves, and when our hobbit was becoming our group thief, we could hire a specialist for that, a lockpicker, a burglar, whatever. That's how we handled it. I don't think there should be one per, unless you're talking about a level 0 or a level 1. And, pardon me. Again, pardon me. If that happens again, I'll hit the pause. No, a level 4 guy hiring a level 4 guy? No, why would the level 4 guy agree to go unless he was going to get considerably more than the guy that was hiring him? That's the way we looked at it, handled it then. All right. Okay. What was it like meeting and interacting with Fritz Leiber? What was it like for Gary? Well, I can't answer for Gary, though I know he was very tickled and excited, as was I. Did you ever work or deal with any of the D&D adaptations for Lankmar? I've been a fan of Fafhrd and the Mouser for the longest time, and D&D is responsible for that. Well, Fritz did not create Fafhrd and the Mouser all by himself, in that those adventures came from really role-playing stuff that he and his lifelong friend Harry Fisher did. It was almost it was every bit as much fun, and it was more lasting fun meeting Harry. Fritz was a very, very polite man. I felt like, oh wow, and I'd met a couple of, well, at that time I hadn't met any other big name authors in person, though I'd published a couple of them. And it was a great treat for me, and he was very gracious and generous with his time. He brought along Harry Fisher, who was actually, in the gist of things, the Mouser. Fritz was very tall and thin and could be hulking or lurking or, and Harry was short and round and full of vip and energy, and it was their dashing role play and their games that they played on the floor that they made up that led to Fafhrd and the Mouser. And I kept up a correspondence with Harry for some time. I published his Finzer family story in 2 pieces, as I recall. And I had the great good fortune to publish Sea Magic, and I believe it was number 11. And as I recall, Sea Magic was a new story, which just tickled this fanboy to death. Okay, now my Stonewall backdrop coming in this back is it's silly. I like it. I love it. The littlest things we can get going on, can't we? A big Stonewall backdrop. Well, that's fun. Might as well put in a portcullis so that you can force up with your 18 strength in case you need to escape. Nah, just a stone so that I can pass through as I become immaterial. Oh, that didn't sound good. Anyway, and that's my attempt at being snarky at the first, and they suggested that you put up a virtual facade in the first place. Well, let me be clear, nobody did. I decided that because I got tired of being asked, what's that over on your left? What's that over on your right? So I just thought I'd block it. Well, I didn't get a big... I'm getting over that cold that I had last week. I didn't get a big enough one because this camera is such a damn wide angle. And I don't know how to focus the angle in on the camera, or if even it's possible. I'm a Luddite. So, yeah, no, I like the books and various paraphernalia you have on the wall. Well, the real interesting stuff's up here where you can't see it. Take my advice, no backdrops. My lovely wife and I enjoy seeing the curmudgeon in his natural habitat. Okay, now this one I had to look up. There is a sense of res gestae on that wall behind you, and we think it contributes to your presence as our Saturday morning game sage. All our best. Happy Veterans Day. Thanks for the service. You're welcome. Res gestae, it's a legal term. And I had to think about the actual definition. And then I began to understand it, and I suspect this was written by a lawyer. But thanks anyway, but I'm going to the Stones and see how that goes. Not the Rolling Stones. Not my favorite band whatsoever. And now the next one is, I like the backdrop. It's really cool. Okay. What was the origin of metallic and chromatic dragons? How did Gary Gygax come up with a taxonomic structure for dragons in D&D? And now jumps around here. Village of Hommlet lacks a lot of plot structure. It works well for motivated and oriented players. How could it be used well with new players who need a lot of direction for their characters' actions? How could it be run well in a pub or at a convention? Okay, one thing at a time here. When you're making a game called Dungeons and Dragons, plural, and the most known colored dragon that most of the people that you're going to be approaching to say, hey, come play my game, is a red smog. And not a great number of people have read about Oriental dragons and the possibility of being pearl or white or whatever, but Gary looked up a lot of different dragon lore and legend. So, more than a dragon, let's have as many dragons as we can think of. And let's do colors. And then we did metallics, but it's really more of a color than, they're not like made of metal. But why not? Dragon Riders had lots of colors, and she was doing that back, I'm pretty sure back around that time. Different cultures, tales and myths and legends of dragons had them different colored. So why not? More monsters for the mix. Chromatic was, okay, I've run out of colors, I'm going to put them all together. And here we are, all the colors of the world. I think that one may have been Gary's little joke. I think maybe. Okay, Hommlet. You might be right compared to today's much tighter written modules, adventures, whatever you want to call it. However, Hommlet, I believe, and not just because I was involved in playtesting some of it, I believe Hommlet is the kind of place where you start a campaign because it's loose, because you have lots of latitude. The Druid in the Grove, Jeru, can be the first clue giver or the first powerful individual to charge the group with a quest or something like that, and it makes a good place to come back to in between. That's what I would probably do with Hommlet, particularly if I had new players. I would just have them all meet in the village of Hommlet that they'd heard about, and they'd all come together there, and that's where we'd start from. That's how I'd do it. Can clerics wield spiked shields? A shield that might inflict spike damage, in my mind, I picture a shield's bash attack and bludgeoning. Okay. The whole basis Well, there are a couple, three things that are the basis of clerics not shedding blood. Number one, the the Christian prohibition about men of God shedding blood. Shouldn't be done. Now, many famous Christian bishops, back in the days when bishops fought, like William the Conqueror's brother, used maces. There are other cultures who shy away from shedding blood of members of the royal family. So they would be killed in ways that didn't show the blood being spread. A Mongol might be wrapped up 6-8 times in a big plush carpet and then have a 1,000-horse Tuman galloped over. And that happened more than once. Strangulation, suffocation of royalty rather than the shedding of royal blood. A lot of that came from the primeval superstitions about what blood was and what it meant. And I mean, everybody realized when a whole bunch of it leaked out, you died, because they saw animals do that. But the attributes attributed to blood, a lot of superstition involved. So that's why Gary put that in there, because Gary was very firmly rooted in the medieval style, medieval Dark Ages period of superstition and social structure and what have you. Now, if a shield had just a big round boss on it and bashed, okay, if it broke a nose and a little blood, that could be, venial sin. However, a spiked shield, whether it's spikes sticking out, which is grotesquely is anything with more than one spike in the center boss is grotesquely impractical. Now there is a shield called a pavis or whatever, P-A-V-I-S-E, that developed a variant called the spiked, that thing, and you put your arm down through, the shield was stood on its spike, and you put your arm down through the harness so that it was almost like a wing, and it had a big wicked spike on the end for poking and stabbing, and became a very offensive oriented weapon. Could a cleric use those? No. If you're gonna stick to that aspect, to that part of the rules as written, no. Clerics can't use, they can't aggressively, offensively use those kind of weapons. Now, if a cleric was attacked by something, and all the cleric had left was his eating dagger, and somehow he managed to poke it in the eye of the whatever thing and kill it, I wouldn't count that against him. That I'd figure out a dispensation. Let's see. Let's see. There was something else here that sort of touched on this. Okay. Then the comments in relation to that, or in response to that, went on. The first one was, I doubt they can, but I reckon a less clear issue is whether or not clerics can use wooden stakes against an enemy. That is, to pierce the heart of a vampire. What do you reckon? Yes, vampire doesn't have real blood. It has vampire blood. I would split that hair in an instant. In an instant. Because the vampire is naturally unholy. It's as most unholy as something could get. in the context of D&D fantasy world, and unless the cleric himself is evil, they are bound and by nature, by compulsion, whatever, to combat unholy, and undead's as unholy as it gets, which is why lawful good clerics who are in good standing, etc., have such an easy turning undead. Just their mere presence, their sanctity, turns the undead. They're no longer living, no longer of this earth. That's the way I interpret it. Your mileage may vary. And so another wag goes on, a little quote here. Dear Brother Basham, I believe the studs in your mace are a bit too spiky. Must warn you that wielding such a weapon verges on blasphemy. I trust that you will take appropriate action to remedy and atone for your sin. Yours in St. Cuthbert's Holy Shadow, Abbot Wackham. P.S. Slaughtering those heretics last week was fun, wasn't it? Yeah, okay. Here we get back into that conundrum of what constitutes good or what constitutes lawful. Lawful originally meant that an individual could be expected to respond in certain ways, or an intelligent animal, some of which have types of alignments, could be expected to respond the same way most of the time in a given circumstance. Last week, I think we talked about it, how lawful is it hanging a murderer? Well, if the laws surrounding the culture say you can't murder people and the penalty is death, then that's lawful. And it's good because it upholds the law. Sticky point, I know. And you know what? Real life situations, dealing on those points, the horns of that dilemma have been sticky subjects for a long, long time. Okay, this was in reference to a question from a Facebook post that I had talked about. Pardon me just a minute. Okay, it seems to have become common for new DMs to seek permission to do things from influential people in the D&D-osphere. It's so strange to me, we never assumed you couldn't do something with the game. It just went for it. That's certainly the original spirit. It's still the way I play. And encourage people in my Wheel of Blame to play. Now a lot of it was bad, but we learned from it. Yeah, well, that's how we learn. For instance, the question specifically about DM PCs run by the DM. We had a few friends run them and quickly learned it was a terrible idea. The temptation to make them a total Mary Sue who carries the story while the players just tag along and watch how cool and epic they are is far too great for most people, especially for all of us when we were teenagers. But we never had to ask anyone's permission to try. Well, let's see. I think I've got a question in here. I didn't print it, or maybe I missed it. Someone had asked a question. Let's see. Maybe I didn't print all of it. Let me go back. This makes me think a minute. Okay, they went back. Okay, it refers back to the hireling question. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, the hirelings come in to do a job. To kill the golem that's guarding the loot, whatever. They come in to do that job. They don't come in to become part of the party and create epic legends. they thereafter will be referred to as, oh yeah, I remember Boris the fighter that helped us. Yeah, I wonder whatever happened to good old Boris. Doesn't always work out well, you're right. All right. Tim, quick general question for you regarding the Charm Person spell. I'm well aware of how it's changed, even from the original to Greyhawk. After OD&D, I was wondering if originally it was considered mind control or subtle suggestion as it became later. I've always assumed it's essentially mind control, give an order and it happens, due to vampires and nixies controlling via that spell, but I figured you were the best person to ask. Well, I don't know about best. Yeah, charm has morphed over the years. No doubt about it. The way I seem to recall it being played in the end when Gary and I talked about it during my months in Carbondale. You could charm somebody, but you couldn't. It became increasingly difficult to force them to do something that was against their innate nature. You couldn't run across a dwarf, a neutral dwarf, and charm them, and then have them go bash in puppies. Well, maybe the dwarf didn't like them. I'm trying to think of a better example. You couldn't turn an orc into a crossing guard, but you could go tell it to sit in the corner and look for cracks in the wall. And to be quite frank, I never gave a lot of thought as to how long people stayed charmed, because usually the charms were thrown on the small M monsters, and therefore once they were downstream, we didn't really care about them. And when the players got charmed, they were cured or healed or uncharmed or whatever. Now we weren't. If if it happened that a player got charmed and they failed their first, uncharming, yeah, but I don't ever recall having anybody charmed for a week. And again, if one of the adversaries that the party had run across and thrown charm on took a week, well, fine. Generally, what we made them do back in the day was just tell them to march off in some direction, and off they'd march. And problem solved. It was pretty complete. It was pretty complete. And I mean, it was pretty tough with that. If they have 3 to 6 intelligence, they only check once a year to see if they become uncharmed. That's pretty rough, and pretty much, unless it's an NPC in a campaign setting, that pretty much takes care of those. Another comment. I love the backdrop. Okay. All right. It occurred to me, since 2D printing and cardstock is cheap enough, these paper minis are disposable enough to use simulations of magic missiles and magic bombs with cheap little firecrackers as a cheap thrill for little pyromaniac punks. We never did that, but there's safe little ways to do that. Well, I didn't play D&D when I was a little punk. However, I did use firecrackers, sandbox battles, Civil War, Knights, and Cowboys and Indians, whatever it was. There was always artillery, so it was usually Civil War. And I would stick little ladyfinger firecrackers, little bitty ones, and stick them around in the sandbox and light them at the appropriate time. And I had a cannon that if you pulled the little spring thing back and shot it out of the barrel, You could shoot a lit firecracker across, and if it blew something, knocked it over, well, it was dead. Now, if you wanted to do this with what you're suggesting, paper counters and whatever, first thing I'd recommend is that you play on a metal table. Second thing I recommend is you don't play in a room with a fire alarm. Certainly don't play in an area with a fire extinguisher system. Bad idea. Now, how would I go about doing it? Well, if I was playing a miniatures game, and we had a table across from that, I could make match guns out of clothespins and shoot stick matches across the board as fireballs. I'm not sure how I do a lightning bolt unless I'd use a laser to simulate a lightning bolt, but I don't know. I'd really make the game a lot more dicey. Oh, and of course, you can always do flaming arrows, get a little metal crossbows. I have one or two up there, and you can always shoot flaming arrows. Now, what makes it more fun is to get yourself some flash paper. You have to go to a magician's supply store, the kind of place that sells magicians and trick stuff and that, and buy that paper. It's highly flammable. So you take a little piece about the size of a postage stamp and just put it on one side of the paper mini, and when the fire gets near it, it goes up most satisfactorily. But there again, not in a room with a fire alarm detector, smoke detector. There we go. That's what I was going for. Smoke detector. Yeah. Ooh, yeah. It's real early in the morning. So don't play in a room with a smoke detector. You can always get little trebuchets and lob firecrackers at each other. I got a couple that'll probably do that. But there again, you better be playing on a metal table and you better be playing outdoors. And then after all, do you really need to? No. Okay. I'm going to close with this ominous post I had. Winter is coming. Well, I don't know where you live, but as far as I'm concerned, where I live in southwestern Ohio, winter's here. It's only going to get up to 31 tomorrow. And in this part of the country, a high of 31 is winter. Screw snow. We still got half the leaves on the trees because this fall was so screwed up. But when you walk outside, your eyes open up like mine did this morning when I went out to get my paper. Woo! I realized that winter is here. So, I think that's all I got. And now, when I get done with this and say goodbye, you'll get to see the new outro. I don't even know if that's a word, but we use it. So, until next time, Dodatagovi. Gotta find the button.
Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Last man around when them rates went down. Call it Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. DSR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree, high as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.